Amid the swirling red dust of the arid Serengeti, a young man collapsed to his knees in the tall grass, clutching his father's faded old shirt. In front of him, a lion was approaching. Can memory truly cross the boundaries of species? Can a wild animal once raised by your hand still recognize you, just by the scent of worn fabric? Today, I'll tell you a true story, about a boy who grew up with lions, about a promise hung high in the trees, and about a documentary that made thousands weep. Come with me, back to where it all began, beneath the roaring winds of the Serengeti, under a blazing sunset, and beside an old shirt that was never forgotten. Hidden beneath the acacia trees of the Serengeti, there lived a boy named Obasi, only 5 years old, yet every morning he would rise with the sun, just to follow his adoptive father deep into the wild. His name was Mosi, a seasoned ranger with sun-darkened skin, deep-set eyes, and a thin beard streaked with white. He always wore the same old khaki shirt, its shoulders frayed, its color faded, its fabric patched. But to Obasi, it was the strongest shirt in the world. Because whenever Mosi wore it, lions grew calm, elephants stood their ground, and the forest itself seemed to fall. Silent. Obasi no longer remembered his birth mother. But to him, Mosi was everything. One day, when lightning ignited the forest and flames tore through the trees, people ran in panic, black smoke swallowing the horizon. But Mosi didn't run. He turned back into the burning woods and came out carrying 2 tiny creatures, singed and exhausted. 2 lion cubs, orphaned. They will live, Mosi said, placing the scorched, trembling bodies into Obasi's hands. From that moment on, something extraordinary began. A bond, unspoken and wild, started to grow between human and beast. Obasi named them Nuru and Duma. The cubs grew up alongside him, feeding from bottles, curling around each other on the ranger station's tattered blanket, and growling playfully whenever the rains returned. No one believed it was possible. But that boy, with tiny hands and unwavering eyes, became part of a lion's pride. And those lions, they became part of a tiny family, deep in the heart of the wild. Day after day, as Mosi stepped out of the station in his faded khaki shirt and sun-bleached cap, Nuru and Duma would trail behind him, living shadows on 4 paws. And Obasi, just 6 years old, would always run ahead, waving a dry branch high in the air, shouting joyfully across the plains. And in those fleeting moments, when nature, man and beast stood as one, the boy learned his first lessons in loyalty, in love, and in what it meant to survive. Time passed, like wind across the grasslands. By the time Obasi turned 10, his father, Mosi, began to cough more often. Not the cough of a cold, but something deeper, something smoldering. He hid it from the boy, still patrolling the forest as usual, still wearing that same old khaki shirt, now frayed at the cuffs. One afternoon, with a soft rain falling, Mosi didn't come back like he always did. Obasi sat waiting on the porch, with the 2 now-grown lions lying still at his feet, their ears perked, their eyes fixed on the dirt road ahead. And when the rain stopped, all they saw was a lioness, roaring into the vast savanna. Mosi never returned. His farewell was held right there at the ranger station. Simple, quiet, just a wooden table, an old framed photo, and that khaki shirt, his shirt, hanging solemnly on the wall. Years later, Obasi left the forest. He studied abroad, learned filmmaking, traveled the world, from the towering skyline of New York City to the rugged peaks of Patagonia. But nowhere else did the wind carry a roar like the Serengeti. Nowhere else did the sunset burn so red. It made you believe nature itself had a beating heart. When he received funding for his first documentary film, he didn't hesitate. He came back with one backpack, a few cameras, and his father's old khaki shirt, the only thing left that still held the scent of soil, sunlight, and memory. But what Obasi didn't know was that waiting for him in that forest were not just memories, but two living beings who had once called his father family. Obasi returned to the Serengeti in the heart of the dry season. The wind whipped red dust into tiny swirling tornadoes, clinging to the lenses of his cameras. He was accompanied by a fellow filmmaker, a quiet Canadian named Finn, a man of few words, but with an eye sharp enough to capture the fleeting. On their third day in the bush, they pitched a tent at the edge of the deep reserve, once his father's patrol route. Everything was going according to plan, until the GPS began to glitch. Then, the map vanished. Radio went dead. Signals lost. In the vast sea of grass, they no longer knew which way led out. Finn panicked a little, but Obasi tried to stay calm. He reached into his pack and pulled out the old khaki shirt, the one thing that made him feel not alone. They camped beneath an ancient baobab tree, hurriedly eating dry rations and sipping water pooled in the curve of leaves. Night fell. The wind howled. And then a roar echoed from the distance, low, deep, and unbelievably close. Finn froze. "Did you hear that?" Obasi didn't answer. His hand clutched the khaki shirt. His eyes stared into the dark. Inside him stirred a feeling, strange yet familiar, as if someone or something had caught the scent of the memories he'd brought back to the wild. The moon rose over the savannah. The wind swept through the tall grass, whispering strange, rustling sounds. Obasi and Finn stood frozen. Two fully grown lions had emerged from the edge of the forest, their eyes sharp as blades in the dark. One of them let out a low growl and began to step closer. Instinctively, Obasi backed away. His hand slipped, dropping his father's old khaki shirt. The shirt hit the earth. The lion stopped. It lowered its head and sniffed the fabric. Then, gently, it licked the worn sleeve. Finn was stunned. What's it doing?" Obasi said nothing. He just stared, locked into the lion's gaze. There was no rage, no fear, just something else. Recognition. The lion looked at him, a long, lingering stare. Then, silently, it turned and walked away. The wind stopped. The grass stood still. No one dared breathe. Obasi bent down, picked up the shirt. His hand trembled. He knew. In that night, something had crossed beyond language, beyond species. The next morning, the first sunlight painted the grass tips gold. Obasi sat silently atop the hood of the truck, still holding his father's old shirt. The scent of old sweat, motor oil, and now an echo of warmth left by the lion's tongue the night before. Finn walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're going to use that scene in the documentary, right? It'll go viral." Obasi didn't answer right away. He looked out over the grasslands, toward the place where, just last night, the wild had reached back into his childhood, with a gesture no one had ever taught it, gentleness. After a long pause, he shook his head. "No, that scene, is only for my father." 2 months later, Obazi released a film titled The Old Shirt, not a story about lions, but about a man who planted kindness in the heart of the wild. No dramatic music, no thrilling chase scenes, just old footage, a worn-out shirt, and the eyes of a creature that seemed to remember something ancient. The film was screened in schools. Some cried, others stood up and volunteered to work at the reserve. One afternoon, Obasi returned to the place his father once called home. He climbed a tree and hung the old khaki shirt high beneath the sun-scorched sky of the Serengeti. No sign, no message, just a small symbol, a way for the creatures once loved to know they had never been forgotten. Dear friends, thank you so much for taking the time to follow this story. If it touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to support us. We've got many more powerful stories to share, and we'd love to have you with us on this journey.